College basketball is just around the corner. Who are some of the top player of the year candidates, NCAA Final Four candidates, and we're going to rank the Power Five conferences, as well as go over the new almanac, the College Basketball Almanac, the all-in guide on college basketball, coming up next on Locked On NBA Big Board.
You are Locked On NBA Big Board, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up? My name is Richard Stamen. You might know me better as @MavsDraft on Twitter. Got a really good episode for you today featuring Leaf Tulane. I got the two best college basketball minds I know, Leaf Tulane and then also Sean Paul. Both of them are absolutely brilliant. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a minute. But thank you, everybody, for making Locked On NBA Big Board the first listen of your day. I know it's not the peak of season or anything, but preseason starting, but we're talking college basketball today. But today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online is where the game starts. So as I said, I've got Leaf Tulane on here, who you know as the grinder. He's always watching college basketball. And then we brought somebody else who is right there with him, and Sean Paul. He's somebody who I've known since like the pandemic started on Twitter. He has absolutely grinded his way up. He's done incredible work. He helped with the Almanac, College Basketball's Almanac. And Sean, if you want to just talk a little bit about the Almanac, some of the work you put in, anything you want to plug. I can't say enough good things about it. I'll let you say even more.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked out the Almanac already, presented by the Field of 68, and then contributions from Heat Check, CBB, and the Three-Man Weave guys all kind of joined together to make this happen. It's 1,300 words on every single team in college basketball, in-depth rosters, talking about pretty much every single player on every roster, everything you can imagine, coaches' quotes, and lineup projections, how we think conferences will finish. I handled the OVC, so I discussed, SIU Edwardsville, UT Martin, who I think is going to be really good this season, the same as SIUE. I have Rayshawn Taylor from SIU Edwardsville as a conference player of the year in the Ohio Valley. So he's a player to watch for sure if you're a mid-major fan or just a college basketball fan in general. Definitely keep an eye on him. And then guys like Parker Stewart and KJ Simon from UT Martin, they're going to be a really good duo for the Skyhawks over there this season. So I would definitely check that out. I mean, if you love college basketball, it's $19.99, and it tells you literally everything you need to know about the season. It'll get you really prepared.
Yeah, Leaf and I were talking about it because we both got it, and we were talking about how we could just turn on the most obscure of obscure games, and we feel like we would have so much inside knowledge. Like I posted on this now Wednesday, it's coming out Friday, but I posted on Wednesday about Aaron Reddish on Albany, who I had no idea. He's Cam Reddish's brother, and I really liked what he had. I don't know if he's necessarily an NBA guy, but it's just really exciting to be able to see these flashes of these mid-major players predicting some of the up-and-coming stars and stuff. It gives you much better insight to it. Really excited for that. So, Leaf, I know you've been able to check it out as well. What all has stood out to you in it?
Oh yeah, no, I'm a big believer in just like going in depth into random teams, like not necessarily this team, but I like how each team gets its own spotlight, and there's not only, hey, this is the projected roster, these are who are supposed to play, but it tells you a lot about who is likely to be an X factor, what potential potholes there could be that trip up a team from where you can see that talent level of the team reaching and what could make it hard for them to reach that goal. That's kind of the way my mind works. I like to think of, okay, why won't this contender make it to the Final Four? I did a podcast on that separately last year that I remember Richard listened to and told me, I like some of these, and whether I was right or wrong, that's some of them. But we had a nice discussion about that. But that's the way my mind works. So it's nicely outlined, it's detailed, and it covers a lot of the questions I think you innately would ask if you're a college basketball fan like we are.
Yeah, and Sean, if you want, before we dive fully into this episode, if you want to plug how everybody can see it, how they can purchase it, and any details you want to give about it, go ahead.
Yeah, it's on gumroad.com. You can just look up the Almanac Gumroad and you'll see the link. And just go to like the Field of 68 Twitter. You'll see everything you need to know about it there. But again, definitely check it out. It tells you everything you need to know about the college basketball season. You have a hot seat, something called the jump seat, which is mid-major coach to the high major level. Guys like Bob Ritchie from Furman, who's going to be in for a really good season. And then you have some player of the year stuff, some headlines to watch, top 25 mid-major players, mid-major teams, which I handled. And it was just a big contribution from a lot of guys who love college basketball. And we really hope that everybody that purchases it enjoys it.
Awesome. Yeah. If you want to check it out, definitely go to all the resources that Sean mentioned. So getting into the episode a little bit more in terms of predictions and stuff like that, because we're talking college basketball here. What are some narratives that you guys are really watching for in this college basketball season? Sean, I'll start with you because in writing this, it can be anything with the Ohio Valley Conference, college basketball, it can be ACC, however you want to do it. But what are some big narratives and storylines you're watching for in college basketball this year?
I think the biggest narrative is pretty easy. It's, can North Carolina repeat what they did late last season, or was it more just a fluke and they got hot at the right time? Because that's what a lot of people are saying about UCLA, and they ended up having a pretty good season. Obviously, North Carolina knocks them out, but UCLA was still really good last year. Were they a top 5 team like many thought they would? No, but they were still a national title contender, I would say, and one of the best teams in the Pac-12. Arizona ended up being better than everybody expected. But can North Carolina carry that momentum into this season? Can they be a legitimate top 5 team, or will they be more of a 3, 4, 5 seeded kind of team? I think that's all hinges on what Caleb Love's able to do. It's hard to be a all-American level player if you're shooting below 40% from the field. It's just not efficient enough. And we saw there's good and bad with Caleb Love. He pretty much won them the game against UCLA. He won them several games in the NCAA tournament. But does North Carolina probably win the title game if he doesn't go 5 for 24? Probably. I mean, that's just super inefficient, and that's what you're going to live with, the good and the bad with Caleb Love. That's what he does. He's going to let it fly, whether it's going in or not, and he just has that scores mentality. But if Caleb Love's shooting below 42% from the field and 34% from 3, I think North Carolina is more of a 11 to 18 ranked team than a 1 to 7 ranked team. I just think they need him to be a little better than he was last season.
Yeah, he had some historically bad numbers from the 2-point scoring, excuse me. Anything within the 3-point line, it feels like it was an automatic miss. So that's going to be big to monitor. What about you, Leaf?
I'll stay in the state of North Carolina, but go to a different shade of blue. I think the biggest storyline to me is how Jon Scheyer replaces Coach Mike Krzyzewski. And, he's been the face of college basketball for 40 years, and now he's not there. Obviously, Hubert Davis took over for Roy Williams last year and made it to the championship game. They matched off between Carolina and Duke for the first time in the Final Four. All these amazing storylines. And I think the biggest thing is, how does Jon Scheyer's impressive recruiting class factor into success, and how will he be measured? Will he be held to the standard Coach K was held to? Will there be it's okay, it's his first year, or is it because they have the best recruiting class in the country and routinely do? Is he going to be held under scrutiny to that same level? And how will Duke perform with all these new freshmen, especially with Tariq Whitehead sustaining an early foot injury? So that's where I'm curious, and I think there's a lot of teams that are returning talent that you don't typically see, like Oscar Shibwe and Drew Timme and Trace Jackson Davis. If I can sneak in a second one here, is you don't typically see, and Hunter Dickinson too, you don't see typically guys that are All-American candidates come back to school and be the feature of their team and have a chance to repeat as National Player of the Year for Shibwe and all conference players. So I'm curious to see how the NIL, and that's the main reason for it, impacts college basketball this year and beyond.
Yeah, that's big. I like the Duke one. I feel like that's like the most obvious one. So I'm glad you took care of that one. My big one, it's also an obvious one, but I mean, it is still something to monitor, which is, for me, how does Kansas kind of rebound and retool? Because a lot of their core pieces are gone. I mean, Ochai Agbaji being a lottery pick, Christian Brown being a first-round pick. They also lost David McCormick and Remy Martin. This is the most shocking thing, but Mitch Lightfoot is finally out of college eligibility, which it feels like has been years coming. Him and Perry Ellis are probably.
Is Perry Ellis gone yet?
It feels like they're both in a retirement home somewhere together at this point. But I'm really interested to see how they get replaced. I mean, they got Kevin McCullough on the transfer portal. We talked earlier this week about MJ Rice. I'm a big fan of him. Grady Dick, Ernest Uned Jr., and Zubi Ejiofor. Terrible at pronouncing some of these names, so I apologize. But I mean, those are a few top 100 recruits, top 150 recruits. So they've got a good pipeline, but how do they bounce back? I mean, they're the champions. Will Kansas, they're always in the mix for a Big 12 title. I can't remember what the exact streak is, but I mean, they're in it almost every single year of the century for Big 12. Is this year it's kind of they're fully unseeded as a top 2 team? Because that's pretty rare. or do they still hang around because Bill Self is Bill Self? So that's something to monitor for me. But are there any other big storylines you guys are monitoring that really stand out to you that wasn't mentioned?
I'll jump in on Kansas real fast and say, as impressive as the freshman class is, I think what they really need is to see what happens with Joseph Yesufu and Bobby Pettiford and KJ Adams, Zach Clements, all these guys that played some minutes and had some bright moments last season, but never had a big enough role to really be remembered as a big impact on that championship team. But they're all guys that are talented. Clements can stretch the floor down low. He could start at the 5. KJ Adams is a very versatile defender. Joseph Yesufu, we saw what he did at Drake ago, and Bobby Pettiford in the Champions Classic before he got hurt. He was awesome in a very limited role. So I think those are all guys that Kansas needs to see what they can get from. And I could see Yesufu or Pettiford being a double-digit scorer kind of guy this year. Whichever one takes a bigger role, I think could wind up scoring 10, 11 points for Kansas and be kind of that unsung hero this season.
Yeah, I like that. And I know Leaf and I actually, we were, I don't want to say arguing, we were definitely debating about Jalen Wilson on there. I know he's somebody who's a candidate for Player of the Year in the Big 12. What do you see for him this year? And then we'll talk about some Final Four teams after. But what do you think of Jalen Wilson?
I think he's I mean, if I hate to spoil it now, but I'll pick him as a Conference Player of the Year. I think he's really good. I mean, he's not the kind of shooter that I thought he would be. He's been a little inconsistent from outside, but we saw in the NCAA tournament the rebounding he can bring to the table, and now he's going to play an even bigger role. I mean, he's the top returning scorer from that championship team, and I think Bill Self's really going to let it loose a little more, score the ball a little more. Bit throughout his career, had the suspension to start last season. I feel like this is a year where Jalen Wilson has expectations that are high, and he's really going to roll with them, solidify himself as an NBA player, average 15, 16 points per game, 7, 8 rebounds. That's the kind of season and if Kansas wins the conference, he's probably going to win Conference Player of the Year.
Dang, so I'm completely outnumbered. I'm smiling over here because I thought I was like, he's going to side with me, and then just completely letting
I'm a big
everything
Jalen
else.
Wilson guy. Yeah.
So, because for me, I think I look at it too much from the NBA lens, which is, I don't know if I buy his jump shot entirely, that low dip and all that. It kind of scares me. So that's always scared me a little bit, but glad to know I'm completely outnumbered by the two college basketball experts. So maybe I should change stance on that and come around on Jalen Wilson. So we'll talk about some of our Final Four teams, though. Maybe, just maybe, we see something like Kansas back in there. But first, let me tell you about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. They're the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, which playoffs are starting like right now, MMA, boxing, and golf, and NBA is back. So, I mean, obviously NBA and college basketball is just a couple weeks away. Head to betonline.net or use your phone to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. So, as I said, we're going to be predicting some of the Final Four. We can kind of do this real quick. We can do this like two ways. I think the more fun way, I know Leaf and I have always done it, where we just kind of count down. Who is your like absolute? We'll start with number one, and we'll go Sean, Leaf, and then I'll go. Although I think I might just want to listen to what you guys say because I don't have anything super concrete. But who is like your safest bet where you're like, all right, if I had to put a ton of money on them and like I'm forced to make this bet on who is absolutely making the Final Four, only one team, who are you putting that money on?
It's still Gonzaga for me. I mean, I know that they lost in the Sweet 16 last year. They lost in the title game the year before. They make the Sweet 16 virtually every year. And when you have that kind of consistency, I think it's safe to assume that they could be in the title contention every year. And I think they are the best team in college basketball. I've said that the last 3 years, and they were the best team in college basketball 2 years ago. They were one of the best teams in college basketball last season. And I think they're going to be the best team in college basketball this year. You have Drew Timmy back. He's going to be a force like usual. I just love the guards, too. You have Nolan Hickman, who I think could make a big jump. Drew Nembhard is very difficult because of how consistent he was, but Nolan Hickman's good. You have Hunt, at least going to be really good on the defensive end. Then you bring in a transfer like Malachi Smith, who was terrific at Chattanooga, really willed them to an NCAA tournament appearance. He was pretty much 20 points every single night. Rasir Bolton, who was really underrated for Gonzaga last season, probably going to shoot over 40% from deep again this season. They don't have the strongest recruiting class coming in, but they're old. They have a guy that's been a multi-time All-American in Drew Timme. They have some defense. They have a lot of depth, and Mark Few's still a really good head coach. if they lose one of their non-conference games to like Kentucky or something, I'm sure the general consensus around Gonzaga is that they're not going to be able to win the championship again. But until I see it, and I forgot to mention Julian Strother, but obviously he's terrific too. But I think Gonzaga is the pick to win the national title for me until I see otherwise. I think they are the best team and most complete team in college basketball.
That's fair. What about you, Leaf?
I got Baylor. I think here's my logic, and I know I smiled when you said they're the best team 2 years ago, and this is because Richard and I have had this discussion many times, so it's all knowing. But my logic is that whoever has the best guards wins, and Baylor's guards were so good a few years ago with Davion Mitchell, Jared Butler, Adam Flagler, Maceo Teague that I never faltered. And had them winning the championship all year, and I tweeted it all around. So I felt very good about that. This year, I think they follow the same recipe. Whereas last year they had James Akinjo, LJ Cryer, they had Adam Flagler. They were really good on paper, but I was never a big James Akinjo fan. I think they got better in terms of their guards. They got older, and then they got an all pro level guy in Keontae George, who is their guy. He's their go-to scorer. I think last year they had a kind of a clarity of, who's going to score buckets when it's close. And James Akinjo said, that's my job, but I don't think it was necessarily good for the team. I think Jeremy Sohan and Kendall Brown were not integrated into the offense the same way this year. I think their team is more complete and it fits in a better situation. I think if Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua were healthy from the start of the year, I'd feel very, very confident in this. The fact that Flo Thomba's there makes me reassured. Jalen Bridges, Caleb Lohner, Langston Love, I haven't even mentioned, and I know Richard really likes him as an NBA prospect, and that's for good reason. He can shoot the ball. He's tall. He's off the bench. And I think you have four guards that have NBA caliber ability, and you've got wings that are veterans. I'm really, really high on Baylor. I do think Gonzaga will make my list, but I feel strongly Baylor is the best team in the country, which I think is less than a popular opinion at this point. Like, I've read a lot of people's stuff, and I've read and listened to a lot of podcasts. I don't think many people have taken Baylor, so maybe I'm sipping the wrong Kool-Aid, but that's the way I feel so far.
I think they're top five for sure.
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
No, I think they're top five for sure. If they had Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua, I might have them first, really close to Gonzaga, but we don't know when or if he's coming back this season. And for me, that makes their front court depth, at least with a true five, a little questionable if Flo Thamba gets in foul trouble. Zach Loveday, who's really not done much at the college basketball level, unless you want to play a smaller lineup with Bridges or Lohner at the five, that's really an issue for me. So I'll have to see what happens there.
Yeah, I like both of y'all's answers. Baylor and Gonzaga are probably the two very best. I'll go with who I think is probably third, just to kind of keep it a little bit different here. But I really like Houston. I know they lost Kyler Edwards, Fabian White, Taze Moore, Josh Carlton too, but really like the freshman class they have with Jarris Walker and Terrence Arsenault. And then also, in a way, Marcus Sasser is like a new addition to some degree because of the injury. So I really like just everything about this Houston team. I don't doubt Ralph Sampson in Houston. I think, look, when you are consistently making the elite, or excuse me, Kelvin Sampson, not Ralph Sampson. When you are consistently just appearing in the Elite Eight, Sweet 16, you're a second weekend team every year. I think they got the experience. Almost their two best players, or their two guards at least, are upperclassmen. I really buy into their talent. I think they're going to be a 1 seed. They're my pick to be another 1 seed and like guaranteed to make it. I think Gonzaga and Baylor are better picks, but they're like the next best for me. Who are some guys in that, or not guys, who are some teams that are now in that, like, all right, I'm pretty confident, like 2 teams, so 2 and 3 in this, that you're confident will make the Final Four, but you could see some pitfalls in them.
For me, I'll go Creighton. Obviously, I think a lot of people have a lot of different thoughts on them, and there's a lot that has to go right for them to be able to get to that level. I would say the number one thing is probably just staying healthy. Can Ryan Kalkbrenner stay healthy? Can Ryan Nembhard stay healthy? Obviously, losing Ryan Hawkins. There's a lot of Ryans on that Creighton team from last year, but losing Ryan Hawkins is big. I just like a lot of what they have and what could be, and that's a lot of what the college basketball offseason and preseason is, projecting what could be. And Creighton is the big B as a national title team, and they could be outside the top 25 if things don't go well. But I think Arthur Kaluma, he could be a first-round pick. He's got that Big East Player of the Year type of potential. I think he's probably their best player. Ryan Nembhard showed flashes of being really, really good last season. He's different than Andrew Nembhard, his older brother, but he's still really good. And Ryan Kalkbrenner, I mean, he was just terrific last season. I think he's really underrated nationally. I think he deserved a little more love than he got, because Creighton, I mean, they really struggled to put the ball in the basket a lot of times last year, and they were really good defensively, and he was a big reason for that, really the main reason for that. And then just adding a guy like Baylor Shireman, who's capable of running the point guard if Nembhard struggles or gets in foul trouble or gets hurt like he did at South. But he's just going to let it fly from outside, and that's exactly what this Creighton team needed. A veteran presence who's been there and done it before at an NCAA tournament level, averaged 20 a game at South Dakota State, won some League Player of the Year, and now he's probably going to go average like 10 to 13 points per game, but over 40% from deep for the Blue Jays this season. I think he is really an underrated addition for Creighton because of how good he can be in this role.
Hey, you're preaching to the choir about Ryan Kalkbrenner too. I'm a big fan of him. I say him probably once a week on this podcast. And I love that Creighton team as well. It's a really good pick. What about you, Leaf?
I'm a big fan of Kentucky this year. I think Kentucky, I would put as my third best team. If I were to rank them right now, obviously no basketball has been played, and I'm projecting that Jonathan Tchamwa joins Baylor eventually. I'd go Baylor, Houston, Kentucky as 1, 2, 3. Gonzaga probably 4, although I could be convinced either way with Gonzaga and Kentucky. But since we've already spoken about Gonzaga, my rationale in Kentucky is they're big, they're long, they're fast. We've said this about Kentucky for years, but this year they've added shooting. They have more veterans than they typically do. They returned the National Player of the Year in Oscar Tshiebwe, and they have players taking on different roles without as much pressure as typically Kentucky players have to take when they have returning good players. For instance, Sahvir Wheeler, I'm not the biggest fan of as a true point guard, but he's a returning SEC, basically all SEC performer who's passed the ball. I think he was the lead assist guy in the SEC last year. And that's my point of concern as their point guard, is someone who's so established. Jacob Toppin's taking over for Keon Brooks. I think he was the better player last year. He's more mature. I think he's got a solid chance to be a first-round pick if he's able to shoot the ball well with his elite athleticism. I think you bring in Reeves to shoot the ball. You've got Frederick to shoot the ball. That's been a concern for Kentucky for a long time, spacing around Toppin. You have Damian Collins, who was a top 20 recruit, and now he's like the sixth person I've spoken of and the third in the front court. I've just got a lot of belief, and I haven't even mentioned their freshmen. My point being is their depth and athleticism is really impossible to match. That's often the case with Kentucky, but it's mixed with veteran presence and shooting, which it typically is not. This team reminds me a little bit of kind of the North Carolina 2017 team that had a lot of bigs push the ball. They have an established point guard. Obviously, I'm a big Joel Berry fan rather than Sahvir Wheeler shooting the ball. But the way they have wings that push the ball, they have bigs and a plethora of them that play different roles and complement one another. I think they're going to be egalitarian in their attack, and I think defensively they're going to be one of the best teams in the nation. So I think Big Blue is going to have a pretty strong say on making a deep run and kind of avenging an early exit to the Peacocks.
I like it. I'll wrap up my Final Four, and I'll let you guys do your last teams as well. So for me, I think it's going to be Houston, Baylor, Gonzaga. This is like such a chalk. But for the fourth team, I actually have a little bit different one. It's not like something super crazy out here, but I actually really like Oregon as a candidate. I really like I'm absolutely blanking Dana Altman, right? Yeah, Dana Altman. I don't know why I didn't trust myself on that, but I really like him as a coach. Will Richardson is obviously very experienced. And then also I think Khalil Ware is going to do really well at Oregon as a freshman. Just kind of that anchor. I know it's a very general outline for them. I think they have a really easy path to success, though. They didn't lose a ton. They lost Jacob Young and Davion Harmon, but I think overall they're kind of replaceable in a way that they're not going to be hurting super hard from missing out on them. I think they're a dark horse Final Four team. Who are y'all's rest of your Final Four? And then if you want to share just a recap of the four you have, I'll start with you, Sean.
I don't know. I would say this is a little bit dark horse. I'll kind of go with your dark horse theme there, though, and I'll say San Diego State. I think they're just as good as they were a couple of years ago. They don't have Malachi Flynn, but Matt Bradley was an important player to a team in college basketball last year. I tweeted out yesterday they scored in games where he scored below double digits. They scored like 62 points as their high, and they lost three of the 7 games they played. They weren't good when he wasn't scoring the basketball, but they were so good defensively that they were able to make up for it. But now they have a little bit of help around him. Darion Trammell coming in from Seattle. That's a guy who was a really high usage player in the WAC last season, but a little more efficient in a lesser role. Then you have that defense still. You have Nathan Mensah. You have Keyshawn Johnson who can defend. You have a lot of size. Jaden Leday, who was at TCU, who a lot of San Diego State fans think he could be like an all-conference first-team kind of guy. Then you have a little bit of shooting concerns, I would say. Micah Parrish from Oakland, I think he's the kind of guy that could settle those concerns a little bit. That's the one thing I'm not sure about with this team, how good their shooting is going to be, because you have guys like Bradley and Trammell who are more of creators for themselves, and Trammell can create for others. Bradley really isn't that kind of guy, but you don't have a guy like Jordan Shackle from a couple years ago who you could just run off a screen and light it up from outside. They don't really have that guy right now, and unless it's Parrish or Winchman, that's a little bit of something I want to see happen first. But San Diego State, I think, is one of the more veteran, more complete, and one of the more well-coached teams in college basketball. So I think they definitely deserve a mention in this kind of conversation.
Yeah, it's funny. Funny you should bring up San Diego State. I wouldn't say they were in my Final Four. I kind of listed my very top-heavy Final Four, but I was going to ask a question the following second. I may still ask this, and I'll give a little teaser. Is what's a team that it doesn't read as an Elite Eight Final Four team that you think could make it there? And that was going to be my top answer. To add one in, I talked about Gonzaga when Sean brought it up. That would probably be my fourth team out of my rankings. And I would say Carolina, based off experience, really has a strong chance to make it there. So I think we've covered the bases there, but I think we should kind of name some individual players in the next segment that we think could really take home some hardware, some accolades, but also I'd love to toss that question out there of who could be an Elite Eight team that doesn't read off as an Elite Eight team.
I'll say Miami. I mean, when you have guards
Yes.
like Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong, I love doing it. Their depth is a big problem, but that starting five, I think, is really good. They have a lot of athleticism: Jordan Miller, Anthony Walker, Norchad O'Meara down low, and then you had guards. Outside of that, the roster is not very good, but I mean, if they stay out of foul, the NCAA tournament, you can play five guys 40 minutes, and I mean, hey, if they don't get tired, then it can work just fine. I think they have one of the best starting fives in the country. Their bench among top 25 caliber teams might be the worst, but they have one of the best starting fives in the country.
Dude, I love hearing that. I absolutely love hearing that. I was in Miami to see their training camp in May, or not training camp, just like some training. And dude, I absolutely love that team. We'll talk about some of our, All-American potential player of the year. And then we're going to rank the conferences coming up in just a moment. So welcome back to Locked On NBA Big Board. Here with Sean Paul and also Leaf Tulane, two of the smartest college basketball fans I know, and basketball fans in general. Let's talk about some of the conferences, though. Sean, how would you rank for this upcoming season the Power Five conferences, the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and Pac-12?
Are we putting Big East in the conversation?
I think I would. I think I would.
Okay. So number one, I would say, is still the Big 12 until I see otherwise. They have a lot of talent. They have a lot of teams that are going 5, 6, 7 seeds in the NCAA tournament. So I think they're pretty clearly the best in my mind. Then number two, I'll go ACC. Outside the top, like 6, I have some questions about it, but they're a lot better at last season. So I'll go with them at number 2. And then number 3, that's where it starts to get a little bit tough for me. I'll go SEC there, because you have Tennessee, you have Auburn, you have Alabama. You have a lot of teams that should be pretty good. Maybe Texas A&M has a good season, so they could be in that kind of mix too. Then after that, I'll go Big East, because you have Creighton, who's up there. You have Villanova, who I still think will be really good. They bring in a great freshman class. You have UConn. You have Butler, who could be okay. You have Xavier, who could be okay. So that's a little bit of a conference I think is a little better than people might think it is. And then I'll go Pac-12 next, and I'll round it out with the Big 10, because the Big 10 just excited about them this season. Obviously, in recent years, they've had some high-seeded teams, but outside of like Indiana, who I think is a borderline top 15 team, I don't think there's a lot there that could compete for anything. They'll have maybe one team pass the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. So I'll put them behind the Pac-12.
I like it. Leaf, I'll let you go next.
I have some different orders, and I would love to hash it out a bit more. So I'll go with the SEC to start. I'm high on Kentucky. I think Arkansas is going to be really good this year. I'm very, very high on Florida, who I don't think many people are very, very high on. I think Auburn's going to be good. I think LSU is going to be a huge question mark, but I like what McMahon does for previously of Murray State. And then you've got a lot of talent just in the SEC always. And I think in Alabama will be good. They've got some freshmen that should crack top 20 in the draft boards. So I'll go SEC, Big 12. I agree, until proven otherwise is a bit of a bold take. I think the Big 12 is firmly in the top 2. Number 3, I'm going Big East. I'm really, really high on the Big East this year. I think Creighton and Nova will both be top 15 teams all season long. I think UConn's going to be good. I think Xavier, Butler, and probably Seton Hall will surprise some people with transfers, and people aren't going to be that knowing about them. I think they're going to get 6 or 7 teams in. At number 4, I'm going with the ACC. I just think Duke, Carolina, Virginia, Florida State's really, and then Miami are there, but there's not much depth. That's 5 teams. I'm not super high on the depth. 5 out of 14 doesn't impress me. Number 5, I'll go Big Ten, because whether they're going to have top heavy teams, I agree with you, Sean. I'm not excited about Indiana. Illinois is not great. Iowa shouldn't be that good. Michigan and Michigan State, I don't know. They're all a bunch of okay, not greats, but they're going to get 6 or 7 teams into the tournament. And then the Pac-12 is my last. I think you got 3 good teams, and you're kind of praying for a 4th to make the tournament at this point, in my opinion. So that would be my ranking. And I just kind of favor making the tournament more rather than projecting who can make the championship this early. And so that's why I would favor the depth of the Big Ten over the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say if the Pac-12 has 3 top 20 most a year with Arizona, UCLA, and Oregon, and they all end up top 5 seeds, and let's say one of USC, Stanford, Arizona State, maybe an outside shot at Washington, one of those gets in, and then you compare it to the Big Ten, where let's say they get 6 teams, but they're all outside the top 5 seeds, I would say getting in 3 teams in the top 5 seed lines is more impressive to me.
That's fair.
Yeah, I personally am not going to rank the conferences. I just don't trust myself. Y'all know more than me. I was looking at it in my head of like draft conferences. All I know is, for me, number 1 is ACC, just because of how top heavy it is. I absolutely love the Duke guys, and then Terquavion Smith over at North Carolina State. I mean, I'm enamored with those guys alone. And I think that holds so much weight that if you're trying to watch NBA prospects, I think it probably starts with ACC, just because of how top heavy a lot of those teams are. They all have top heavy NBA talent. So for me, that's where I like, but obviously that is not the best college basketball conference. So let's do a quick little roundtable and then we'll wrap it up. But who do y'all see as getting player of the year? I'll answer both of these. And who would be your player of the year, your expectation? So it could be same answer, it could be different. Sean, I'll start with you.
Each of the power conferences?
Sorry,
national.
Just the John, or I'm blanking on it, but just the overall national player of the year, the Naismith player of the year, I think.
That's a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of candidates. You have Sheboy, you have Timmy, you have Trace Jackson Davis, you have Dickens, some guards like Sasser, maybe Jaime Jaquez is like an outside kind of candidate. I'll go with Drew Timme, because I think he's just bound to win one at some point. I don't know if Oscar Sheboy is going to win it again with the numbers he put up. He was really good, really impressive, but at the same time, my stance last year was I rely on Keegan Murray and Johnny Davis more late in games. Like, if those are guys you fear when they have the ball in their hands, you don't do that with Oscar Sheboy. And I think you do that with Drew Timme. You fear when he has the ball in his hands, and I think he'll be able to average close to 20 a game this year, 10, 11 rebounds. And if Gonzaga is the number 1 team in the league, they will be, I think that should be good enough to win him the National Player of the Year.
Yeah, I've got Drew Timme as well. I think he's bound to win one. He's the most productive and most consistently productive player in the country. Like you said, when the going gets tough, Gonzaga is going to lean on someone like they did against Memphis, and Drew Timme against an NBA center and Jalen Duren was unbelievable. I think you can expect more of that, and I don't think it's going to be particularly close. I think Drew Timme is going to win in a landslide.
Yeah, I think he's the clear-cut winner, especially when you look at, I mean, Chet took a lot of his touches away as the opposite big, and going from him to Efton Reed is going to help Drew Timme a lot in terms of statistical production. So I think it's him. And also I'm in Dallas, so I feel obligated to say this because he's from here, but I really do like Drew Timme. I saw him in the pre-draft process. I mean, I think people are going to be surprised with how much improvement he makes, not only as a playmaker. I think that's always been something people know, but he's not an alpha yet on that regard. I think he's going to take that jump, but also the 3-point shooting. I saw a lot of that in the camps I saw, and I think it's legit. I think he's going to be able to stretch the floor. I firmly believe, Luka Garza was the 50-something pick in 2020 or 2021, whatever it was. And I think you're kind of looking at potentially a similar route, but I think Drew Timme has a better chance of sticking in the NBA. I really like Drew Timme's game. He's defensive liability, offensively gifted, but
if Timmy starts making threes, I mean, I don't know how you're supposed to stop him. I mean, you're not stopping him.
There's no way. Yeah, that's exactly it. He's going to be the best offensive player. So he's my pick. I think he's going to be the pick, which all three of us said the exact same thing, which makes me think he might be almost a consensus pick, barring, something else happening. But this was a really fun episode. I know college basketball is still like a month away, which it feels like it has been dragging its feet, going so slow. But with the NBA here, I think it's going to speed that up so much faster. So if you don't follow Sean already, let me flash his Twitter handle right below if you're watching on YouTube, which, by the way, greatly appreciate you watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcast from. Remember, we are free 5 days a week. But Sean's handle is just over here at the bottom left. In the meantime, Leaf and I will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining, Sean, and have a wonderful rest of y'all's day.